Welcome, everyone. I'm Katie Sawyer. I'm Senior Director of Donor and Community Engagement with the San Diego Foundation. Thank you all for joining us today for such an important conversation. I am happy to be continuing our Enabling Community Solutions learning series today with a discussion about such a critical issue that affects so many in our region. This is the second in a series of 8 webinars. The goals of the series are to gain a deeper understanding of some of the most pressing issues facing our communities, to spotlight and learn from some of the leaders who are doing innovative, collaborative work to address challenges, and to share solutions that we can all be a part of, both individually and as part of the San Diego Foundation community. And since the goal of the series is to dig into the most pressing and critically important issues in our region, and in honor of Black History Month, today we will be talking about some of the specific impacts of systemic racism and how our communities are affected. Specifically today, we'll be talking about generational wealth for Black San Diegans and the ways that our systems, both nationwide and locally, have intentionally prevented Black families from building wealth or even gaining a foothold. Nationwide, the typical white family has a net worth that is nearly 10 times greater than their Black counterparts. And we know that that disparity didn't happen by accident. We'll talk today about the policies and systems that have created the wealth gap and about how we can work now, today, together to correct those injustices. I'm so grateful to all of our attendees for joining us today to learn more, because now is the time. And these issues don't belong to the Black community alone. They are for all of us to work together to address. A couple quick instructions before we kick off the discussion, even though I think we're all probably Zoom experts by now. For attendees, you do not have the ability to unmute or to turn your camera on, but we do want to know what questions you have, and we'll be sure to get them answered by our experts. So please enter any questions that you have in the chat field, either to all panelists or to me directly. And instead of saving questions for the end, I would ask that folks just enter your questions along the way, and I'll make sure to pose those questions to our panelists as we go. And now I want to dive straight into our conversation as we have lots of content to cover. I am very grateful to the experts who are here with us for this discussion, both for their time today and more importantly, for the work that they do. Our discussion today will feature Donna De Berry, President and CEO of the Central San Diego Black Chamber of Commerce. Donna brings a wealth of experience in global diversity and inclusion, including from previous roles at Indeed, Starbucks, Wyndham Resorts, and more. And she has been recognized nationally for her work, and she's been described as a trailblazer and a pioneer. And if you don't know her already, you'll see why today. We also have with us Rudy Johnson, President and CEO of Neighborhood House Association. Having spent most of his life in San Diego, Rudy knows the impact that neighborhood house programs have on a family's life. As a child, he participated in their Head Start program himself. And today he leads the organization with passion and vision and has transformed NHA into one of the nation's model human services agencies. It's also an economic engine in our region with over 800 employees. And the San Diego Foundation's own Pamela Gray Payton. As Chief Impact and Partnership Officer, Pamela oversees the Foundation's community impact programs, leading our strategic initiatives that advance quality of life for San Diegans. She plays a critical role in developing cross-sector partnerships, which of course includes the recent launch of the Black Community Investment Fund, which we'll be discussing in depth today. So thank you to all 3 of our panelists for being with us today. Now, there is certainly much more to these issues than we'll be able to cover in this brief hour. So to help quickly lay a foundation for our discussion, we wanted to start with sharing a brief video. This is a news interview about the wealth gap with former NFL player Jason Wright.
Black families have a median net worth of $17,000. Meantime, the median for white families is 10 times that at $171,000. That's from a new McKinsey study on the racial wealth gap. Jason Wright is the co-author of that study. He's also a former NFL player who's now a partner at the management consulting firm. And Jason, thanks for joining us today.
Of course.
I knew there was a gap, but that's a stunning gap.
Right.
10 times as much money?
Right.
What happened? What motivated you to do this study, and what do you think really played into this?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think often people say, oh, McKinsey's engaged on this, but it's actually part of a multi-year commitment we've had trying to figure out what is the economic value of unlocking diversity in the American economy. And so it was just in that vein, and then a bunch of us had some enterprising ideas to really focus on this topic and see what it meant for the American economy.
Were you shocked by the numbers?
No, yes and no.
Yeah. I mean, I expected a gap. I just didn't expect 10 times for the median.
Right. It's difficult to see that number and say, wow, like, how did that materialize? But when you think about it, one, as a personal experience as a minority, and then if you think about the structural barriers that existed prior to the Civil Rights Act and even since, it kind of makes sense. It hasn't been that long where Black people have had full participation in the economy. And so it wasn't terribly surprising, but hard to read nonetheless. But our goal in this was to lay out a framework that put all that data together and allowed people to start to engage in a structured way around solutions.
Part of the gap has to be because of homeownership, right?
That's right. Yeah, homeownership is a large portion of the wealth gap. And there's some structural reasons for that, and then there's some opportunities currently. So we see the wealth gap in 4 components in our report. Community context, which are the communities in which African Americans are clustered in the U.S. And the interesting stat there is we're clustered in, 2/3 of us are clustered in the 16 states that perform lowest on measures of economic output, of education outcomes, healthcare outcomes, et cetera. So yeah, so there's something about the communities we're in. Then there's the wealth that gets passed down generation to generation. Then there's the income that's built during an individual's lifetime as a participant in the economy. And then there's family savings, which is how that wealth, or that income is then converted into long-term wealth. And all those things are connected, but across those, in that family savings bucket, in that family wealth bucket, homeownership is a major component. And there's a couple things that we think about in that, and how you could impact that. One, historically, going all the way back to 1934, Black people were only allowed to live in certain neighborhoods, Class D-rated neighborhoods. And so as everybody made money with housing booms, that didn't happen for the African American community. But you have opportunities now with things in the tax legislation around opportunity zones, which are intended to send private capital into neighborhoods that have been historically distressed.
How do you make sure that winds up in the pockets of the families living there and not
right.
developers who are coming and skimming off the top?
In all likelihood, unchecked, it will go to developers. But I think there's creative ways through public-private partnerships, businesses who are incentivized in building up their communities, multiple stakeholders to ensure that it gets done right. But I think that's where we wanted to lay out some of these facts so that you get all those folks to the table and they start trying to find some solutions.
I think that laid a nice foundation to kick off our discussion. Donna, to start us off, I want to continue kind of laying the foundation of why this is the conversation that we're having today. And the entire mission of the Black Chamber is to create generational wealth. Donna, could you share a little bit with us about why is generational wealth the topic that we need to be talking about? And what are some of the barriers to generational wealth?
Yes, first of all, I just want to say thank you to San Diego Foundation for inviting me to be on this panel, but more importantly, to having this incredible conversation. Certainly, I want to start out by saying that we are in a crisis when we talk about generational wealth and the lack of it for the Black community. Black households, if you think about it, have never been more than 5% of the nation's total wealth, while white households have held over 80%, despite making up over 13% of the population. And when you look at just even in San Diego County, about the median wealth of Black families, it's 1/10 of that of white families. It is because we are, well, let me just say this, and then you put COVID on top of the crisis. We're in a crisis on top of a crisis. And when we talk about more about what are the barriers of building wealth right here in the San Diego region, it's a multitude of things, from student death to institutional practices like redlining, Black people being underfunded, underemployed, and the undervaluation of homes in majority Black neighborhoods, as well as predatory lending practices. It is impossible to create generational wealth if Blacks are systemically discriminated against in competing for economic parity. And it shows up for Black businesses in the community who are having challenges getting loans and things like that. So we are in a crisis, and we have a crisis on top of a crisis when it comes to generational wealth. You can't get to generations if you can't begin with this the generation that's existing today. So, you know, there's a lot to unpack about those challenges and about Black businesses and the challenges that they're having in the community that they serve.
Thanks for sharing, Donna. I think that the point about crises on top of crises is an important one that we all need to be paying attention to when not everyone in our community is affected in the same way when a crisis comes up. And unfortunately, it is almost always those who are suffering most who are affected most. Kind of continuing to lay the foundation. When we think about this conversation today and initiatives like the Black Community Investment Fund, Pam, why is it important that we talk about Black San Diegans in particular instead of taking a strictly kind of income-based approach?
It's a great question, Jenny. Katie, I'd like to build on what Donna has already said, because I think therein lies the answer to the question. We are working right now focusing on those with the least. So when we look across the region, whose income is most stifled, whose educational success is most impacted, we recognize it being the African-American population in San Diego. And so for the purposes of the San Diego Foundation, we really wanted to start with those with the least, lowest level of home ownership. We wanted to start with those who are suffering most with education in terms of educational success. And similarly with entrepreneurship, when we look at the region, who are the entrepreneurs? Where is the entrepreneurship needing the most support? It's within the Black community. And so for the focus of the Black Community Investment Fund, it was very clear that without support and without a strategic initiative in place that really engages the entire region, we were going to have little opportunity really to change the outcome for the Black community.
And Rudy or Donna, would you have anything to add to that about why it's important that we focus on the Black community in particular with this work?
But, well, I'll just chime in and say, you know, that age-old statement that you hear, rising tide floats all boats, is not necessarily true in the African-American community, because in the African-American community, the assumption is everyone has a boat to begin with. And the bottom line is, for years, for decades, for centuries, African-Americans have not had the boat to put into the rising tide to lift out of poverty, right, and despair. And so there are really three ways we can focus on what I call boat construction or ship construction. Number one is job creation. So you have to create jobs, not just jobs that can allow African Americans to jump into the real estate market. Here in San Diego, you need a working household of about $150,000 to really qualify for a loan, just to afford maybe a townhome or a condo. So if you have two working adults, each adult has to make somewhere around $75,000 and above. So where are those African Americans in San Diego working, making $75,000 and above? So job creation. Number two, entrepreneurship. And I know Donna's going to speak to that. She's the expert in that, you know, really spinning off and creating opportunities to generate revenue through commerce, through trading of something, widgets, whatever it is you make. So that's number two. Then number three, asset transfer. And you heard from the gentleman on the video right before we came on, you know, African Americans historically haven't been able to transfer assets because we didn't own them. We didn't own homes. The land that we did own got taken away from us, right? in the early and mid 1800s. So we had to work extra hard in the early 1900s to try to reestablish that in segregation, right? And so the transfer of assets is not working for us. So hopefully today we'll talk about these three legs of the stool, so to speak.
We absolutely will. And Rudy, I have always loved that saying, and I think it's even more powerful now that you've fleshed it out, that our role isn't only to rise the tide, it's to build boats underneath people so they're not just drowning in deeper water. I think that queued us up really nicely, both what Donna has shared and what Rudy has shared, into my next question for you, Pam, which is that we launched this fall a joint project of the San Diego Foundation and the Black Chamber, and with many, many other partners involved, the Black Community Investment Fund, specifically to address some of these barriers that we're talking about. Pamela, I think we have a graphic with the 4 pillars of the Black Community Investment Fund. Could you walk us through what the 4 pillars are and why these were chosen in particular?
Yes, thank you. So we convened a focus group essentially and said, what are the disparities? First of all, what is the disparity that we want to address? And the disparity is creating generational wealth within the Black community. What are the ways in which we can most effectively do this work? That process resulted in the 4 pillars that you see in front of you. So education, employment, housing, and entrepreneurship were identified as the 4 key areas that we would need to address to really move the needle in terms of Black creating wealth within the Black community. With education, the goal is to prepare more students for opportunities to go to college or to pursue training programs. With employment, Rudy was just talking about it. How do we better prepare a workforce that not only is going to have the ability to pay the bills, but to be able to save and be able to purchase homes and be credit worthy? A lot of the people who have been most impacted by the pandemic are those in low wage earning positions, those working in the tourism industry, those working in areas that could not withstand working from home. And so we want to do more in developing pathways to careers for members of the Black community. Donna has spoken about the entrepreneurship pillar quite well, and we recognize that without entrepreneurship, which is also a pathway to economic prosperity, we would not be doing ourselves justice and really addressing the key issues. And lastly, and this is going to be part of the conversation that we're talking about today, is housing and being able to do more in the way of creating pathways for families to purchase their first home.
Thank you, Pamela. And to structure the rest of our conversation today, we'll be talking a little bit about each of these pillars, why they're critical components of wealth building, some of the challenges associated. And we'll start with the critically important piece of housing and home ownership. We heard about it in the video, mentioned several times. When we're talking about building wealth that can be passed down through generations, we know that the ownership of a home is a critical component of that. Pam, can you share a little bit about why housing is so important to generational wealth? And then I think we'll want to dive into how and why our history of redlining is still impacting San Diegans today.
Yeah, let's talk about redlining. I came across a definition that I thought was really, really informative, and one that I wanted to share with our listeners today. In the 1930s, the federal government established the Homeowners Loan Corporation. The staff there, using data and evaluation organized by local real estate professionals, including lenders, developers, and appraisals, in each city assigned grades to residential neighborhoods that reflected their mortgage security that would then be visualized on color-coded maps. So we do have a copy of a map that we wanted to show that you're seeing now. If you are in an area that is red, that neighborhood was considered least credit worthy, meaning that we are not going to be offering mortgage loans to families in those neighborhoods. If you were living in an area or wanted to purchase in an area that is in the yellow, that meant that it's definitely declining and not an area worthy of investment. If you were in a blue community, the blue communities were still desirable communities. And if you were in the green neighborhoods, those were the best neighborhoods for the mortgage industry to invest in. And what we've realized is that these grades were a tool for redlining, making it difficult, if not impossible, for people in certain areas to access mortgage financing and become homeowners. Redlining directed both public and private capital to native-born white families and away from African Americans and immigrant families. And as we know, home ownership is arguably the most significant means of intergenerational wealth building in the US. And these redlining practices from 8 decades ago still have impact on our communities today. This is a map for those looking at this map at home. This is San Diego in 1935, not that long ago.
And what's striking about this is if you look at this map, it still so clearly reflects in many ways the division of wealth that we still see in our community today. I think this makes such a strong case for the importance of talking about wealth as it's passed down and not just the income that a person is earning today.
So, Katie, to that point, I think it's very important to recognize that in the 1930s, the federal government intervened in a way that made the attainment of generational wealth almost impossible for certain members of the community, for certain citizens. If you were a Black citizen, you were immediately disqualified, essentially, from being able to achieve wealth through the ownership of property.
And it's not just redlining. There were specific government programs as well. I know when we think about wealth, and I don't come from money, but when we think about the wealth that is in my family, both sets of my grandparents bought homes with GI loans after World War II. And those loans were not available to Black veterans.
Exactly.
Pamela, could you share a little bit about this pillar in the Black Community Investment Fund and the work that is being launched now to help Black families purchase their first home in our community?
Yeah, so the San Diego Foundation and the Central San Diego Black Chamber have collaborated with several financial institutions who have become alerted to the fact that they need to do something, right? They need to work with the community to do something to address the inequities that have affected Black San Diegans for decades. And through our work, we have launched the Black Community Investment Fund Homeownership Project. And with the Homeownership Project, we will be assisting as many as 50 families to purchase their first home. The process will include financial management training. So we have partners who are going to be offering the financial management training courses. That is a HUD certified course. And at the end of that, families who are now qualified and at 80% or less of the area median income will receive grants to help them purchase their first home. So the expectation is that you will receive from somewhere around $70,000 as a grant. So it does not have to be repaid to put down and to help you purchase your first home.
That's incredible. I am so excited to be able to hopefully soon see the stories of families in their first home.
Completely agree with you. And it's in the process right now. We've got our first 1 or 2 families that are in the pipeline to get to the point where within a couple of weeks, months at the latest, we will be able to announce those first buyers.
As we have more information to everyone in this meeting with us today, I promise we will share it with you. This is rapidly developing work. And we know that home ownership affects so much more than just the physical house that you live in. It's wealth in your family. Your neighborhood also affects job opportunities, the schools that your kids can go to, and more. So I want to take this chance to transition into talking about some of the other pillars too. Rudy, I will turn to you to kick off our discussion about the education work in general and the education pillar of the Black Community Investment Fund. And I want to start by looking at neighborhood house associations' specific approach to supporting the communities that you serve. your continuum of care model works with students not just in one point in their education, but from pre-K through college and beyond. Why is that long-term approach so important to supporting kiddos and families and communities?
Well, thank you for the question. And again, it's great to be here, and I'm just so happy that the foundation has sponsored and delivered a pathway to have these important discussions. We believe in creating our own workforce, and my vision was very, very simple. When I got here, we had various programs that were operating, but they weren't really connected to an outcome that I thought matched the vision, not only of this organization, but who I was as the incoming president and CEO. So what I wanted to do was link all 25 programs together so that we had an outcome that was sustainable going forward. And it's very simple. We work with mothers, African-American moms that are in their second and third trimester of pregnancy. We want to deliver healthy children because it is critical in the African-American community. A lot of moms aren't going full term. We're losing a lot of babies at birth, et cetera. Once we deliver a healthy child, we want to enroll them in our Head Start, early Head Start programs, home-based model, then center-based. We want to build a bridge to charter school. We're going to be looking to stand up a charter school from TK to about third grade, hopefully in the near future. We have a state-of-the-art technology center at 41st Street. If you haven't been down there, I advise you to go down and take a look. We have a college prep program. That program's been up and running for about 7 or 8 years now. Reality Changers is our partner with that. We have a robust summer internship program where high school and college students come back and actually work inside of our organization in their area of focus or their major to make sure that they understand what they're getting into. They like that work, and it's a resume builder. And then at the end of the day, 20 years from now, I want to hire those babies that I'm serving in Head Start right now. And if I'm not here, the next president and CEO will. And so we're creating our own workforce inside of this model. And then we have all of the wraparound services on the outside of the inner circle that helps the family and the child as he or she is moving through the model. Now, why is that important? It's very important when you've had decades and decades and even centuries of inequities, right? And you talk about economic inequities and really righting the ship, so to speak. The only way you can do is start that process early and ensure you have a model and tracking that supports that child all the way to where we deliver them back to our workforce 20, 25 years from now. And education is a very, very important piece of that, not only in the early childhood educational component, but also bringing them back from college to do internships. One more point. It cost us $160,000 per child to invest from Black Infant Health all the way through the summer internship program. Why do we think that's a great investment? Because we know whether we hire that child inside of our organization, they work in the city of San Diego or anywhere else in this nation, if they're making $70,000 or above. Now remember, that's the magic number that I talked about earlier, right? So we're hoping we can spin them off in after college into a job to make $70,000 and above. If they're at a 28th percentile tax bracket times 20 years of working, the ROI on that $160,000 is $720,000 plus back to the federal and state and local governments. That's 6 times our original investment. We think that's a good bet.
Rudy, that so powerfully makes the case for the importance of this work. This work is important in how it supports individuals and families, but also in how it lifts up our entire community. And I think we really wanted to share the graphic with the continuum of care model because I think that your work so beautifully, so beautifully shows that when we're talking about these issues in a person's life, they're not separate issues. We're talking about about different periods in someone's life and how they're all connected. I think that we have on the next slide just one photo that I want to be sure that we share, which is a picture of our picture of little Rudy. Back in, I won't say the year, but back in when you were in the Head Start program yourself. And I want to ask also, so the Black Community Investment Fund, as we're launching this work, will have a focus specifically on establishing mentorship and academic enrichment for Black middle school through high school students. Why is mentorship at that age so critically important?
I'd love to jump in and answer that for you. One of the challenges that we think a lot of our kids experience is not having role models that allow them to see beyond their current circumstances. So if we are able to connect our students, match our students to mentors who are successful in a range of careers, it gives them an option and an opportunity to see themselves differently. Now, we've talked a lot about the past former President of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, and how seeing them in those roles, now seeing Vice President Kamala Harris in the role of Vice President is so illuminating for youth because it shows them that achievement is possible at the highest level, but it's not without challenges. And what we are hoping, through the education pillar is to match students with mentors. And also, very importantly, to give them academic support so that success in middle school is not a given right now, right? It needs to be something that they are striving for. And what we are really wanting to see is that not only will you become the successful middle school student, but high school, accepting anything less than an A is not acceptable. And so we want those children to get to high school and be high achieving high school students, where at the end of high school and it's graduation day, it's not, can I go to college? It's where will I go to college? How far away am I willing to go to college? Because I have so many wonderful opportunities in front of me. And I think all of this ties back to the work that we are trying to address around redlining, which very directly, speaks to this, because a lot of our students are living in communities and attending schools that are overcrowded and are under-resourced. And it's largely because of the redlining challenges that we've talked about. So we really want to see students have access to quality schools across the region. But if we can't do that within our efforts, we really want to bring the resources and the support directly to the students.
And since you have jumped back to redlining and housing a little bit, we had a question come in around the homebuyer program. With the current housing market conditions, are hopeful homeowners finding appropriately priced houses? Will the homeowners have to have the home identified before they're approved for assistance, or is that part of the homebuyer program, helping them find an appropriately priced home?
We have not launched directly into the finding homes for them, but our expectation is that the buyer working with a realtor will find the property that they want to purchase and enter into the approval process with our partner LISC to get financing for that property.
Thank you, Pamela. And there will be more information to come about that the homebuyer program soon. That is rapidly developing work. Rudy, I want to jump back to you. We talked about the critical connection between education and employment, and we know that job creation and income are critical for building wealth that can be passed down. How does Neighborhood House help young people make that jump from education to career? I think we've seen statistics that the ages 18 to 24 are a critically important time. How do you help your young people make that jump, and why is that stage so important?
Well, thank you for that question. So this is a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. Being a native San Diegan, I went to Horseman Junior High, Crawford High School, and then I went to Texas Southern University, which is an HBCU, historical Black college and university, for those of you that don't speak in acronyms. Texas Southern is in Houston, Texas. So imagine a 17-year-old graduates one day from Crawford High School and is attending Texas Southern University a day after that in Houston, Texas. You know, very huge, it was just a huge cultural shock. You know, coming from a predominantly white community at that time, I graduated in 1983, I don't mind sharing that. And I went to Texas Southern, which was a predominantly African-American university, about 98%. Really showed and demonstrated to me that African-Americans could fulfill roles that I historically had not seen them in San Diego. So to your point of why mentors, to Pam's point, why mentors are important, you need to see that excellence demonstrated in front of you to visualize yourself achieving that excellence. So I wanted to park that for a second. On top of that, once I finished from Texas Southern University, I did not have an entree into the profession that I studied for, which was civil engineering. There were no internships waiting for me in Houston. So I had to rely on my connections to come back to San Diego, and I went to work for the city of San Diego as a resident engineer in the field. So my thought was, as I'm interfacing with these youngsters through our summer internship program, which is part of our continuum of care model, the one thing that I wanted to do was expose them to their area of interest and give them an opportunity to build resume. So when he or she leaves college, they can parlay that experience into something that was, you know, going to put them in the front of the line in terms of competing for a job. So it was a two-stepper for me. It was number one, giving you the experience, parlaying to the front of the line. Now you have a competitive edge on the competition. And this is why I think internships, employment, all of those things are part of the bridge that we need to build to, number one, invite African Americans back to San Diego to come to work because we're losing them at rapid pace, but also open the door and give them that opportunity that they need to be successful. And we're very focused on that here at the Neighborhood House Association through our summer internship program. And then here's the icing on the cake. If you complete all of that, and I happen to be the president and CEO, I'm going to come recruit you from that historical Black college that you're currently at, and I'm going to give you a full-time job, hopefully making about $70,000 a year or so you can afford to buy a home in San Diego and build that generational wealth over time.
Rudy, and I think that so powerfully highlights that this isn't just the work of nonprofits and philanthropists. This is the work of employers to think about what are the wages that we're paying folks and what's the talent that we're attracting. And is that you think the key to keeping our talent in San Diego is while young people are in college, making sure that they're finding opportunities while they're home from college so that they think about staying afterwards?
Absolutely. There are two things. We survey our cohorts as they exit our summer youth program, and two things constantly come up. Number one, opportunity back here in San Diego. They feel like there are no opportunities for African American graduates, and that's real. Whether you agree with that or not, this is what these young folks are telling us here at Neighborhood House. And the second thing is, it's very expensive to live in San Diego, and I need to find a job that can keep me at that competitive edge so that I can afford to buy a home and take care of my family. So those two things are really the constant feedback that we're hearing from the cohorts.
And I want to jump back just a little bit because Rudy, one of the things that we talked about in preparing for this conversation was the importance of HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. And I wanted to make sure to give you a chance to share that with our audience members today. Why are HBCUs so critically important in both their formation and the role that they play today?
Well, there's three things. Number one, I'm always indebted to institutions and individuals that give me an opportunity when no one else or no other institution would. Texas Southern gave me that opportunity to be the best me I could be. So that's number one. Historically, historical Black colleges and universities were established usually in the late 1800s, early 1900s, because African Americans were not allowed to go to predominantly white schools. We were not allowed to be admitted to those universities and colleges. And so that was our only option. And then lastly, not only do you get an education in your major of choice, you get an education in life. You learn how to survive in HBCUs. And when the chips are down, you just grab and hold on. And really, that gives you that fighting edge that you need to be successful in your career.
Thank you, Rudy. And speaking of innovation and fighting edge, we're going to turn to the final pillar and back to Donna to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and business ownership. Donna, what are some of the challenges that Black entrepreneurs face, kind of writ large and specifically in our region?
Yes. Thank you for that question. First, I want to start by saying that pre-COVID, Black-owned businesses had challenges anyway, specifically around financial help through financial institutions. It was always about a lot of the historic systemic practices and policies and inequities that impact Black businesses from receiving financial help. And it's been a huge challenge. And then when COVID hit, it was like the icing on the cake, I should say, where Black businesses were disproportionately left out or denied the stimulus money. And that has everything to do with historical policies and procedures that the federal government, the state, even the city, and their mandates and how they executed and literally distributed that the federal government, the money, the small business relief funds that were offered to small businesses. And so for them, there was not equity as it relates to the recovery and the reopening of businesses. And they still, many of them had to close their doors. And so, I was thinking through, when you ask about some of those challenges, it reminded me of my own challenges that I had as a business owner and as a woman. And I think about these challenges still exist today. They haven't, those challenges haven't moved or changed. They've actually gotten worse. And there's a lot of data and research behind that. I always talk about, I am a data scientist, and I certainly am always looking and digging for research and to see what the latest and greatest is. But as a business owner of 6 businesses, the challenges that I had, I traveled between obstacles and opportunity. And I hear today, right here in San Diego County, businesses that are always talking about their obstacles between, between obstacles and opportunity, how they travel between those two. The obstacles being, number one, the biggest, and I would say we surveyed here at the Central San Diego Black Chamber, we surveyed over 1,500 businesses, and over 97% said the number one obstacle was financial help. Mm-hmm. That they were denied financial help from institutions that are right here in San Diego, the banks and other type of financial institutions. And then I would say that number 2, the biggest one, the next one would be mentorships and things of the sort. And so one of the things that I love partnering with the foundation is that we've created the Urban Resource Business Center because we realize that not having mentorship, financial support, not making sure that we provide personal and professional education and tools and resources, that these Black businesses in this county will not only not be able to reopen, but they will not be able to survive or thrive. And because of that, it's really critically important that we provide mentorship, business mentorship. In other words, business acumen, how to grow your business. What are the things that you need to start a business, a startup? How do you elevate your business? All of those things are critically important as we think about how are we going to, again, build an entire economy. This isn't just about Black businesses. This is about how do we create an economic ecosystem for San Diego County as a region. But believe me that Black businesses are part of that ecosystem. They're part of all businesses. And if we are going to recover as a region, as an economy, in an ecosystem, we have to make sure that all businesses have an equitable opportunity to recover from COVID. And that is only going to happen with the support of the entire community. This isn't a Black problem. This isn't a problem, someone else's problem. This is our problem. Everyone that's on this call, it's the city's problem, the county's problem. We all have an opportunity to come back better, to come back with a resiliency as a region. And this is what's critically important, and Black businesses are a part of that. And we need to make sure that we have all the tools, the resources, and the financial support for these businesses to come back whole and equitable.
Donna, that is so beautifully and powerfully put, and I think makes the case so clearly that of the importance of this work, primarily, but not only because we have a responsibility to correct injustices, but also because Black-owned businesses are an economic, Black-owned businesses, Black organizations employing African Americans are an economic driver in our region that strengthens our entire economy. And I want to make sure to call out a point that you made that responds to one of the first questions I asked: why make investments specifically in Black businesses, Black communities? And Donna, when you mentioned that we know that the PPP funding specifically did not go to Black-owned businesses, the reason we need to invest is because the programs we have aren't getting to the people that they're designed to get to.
You're absolutely right, Katie. Can I just add on to that? You know, I know that right now we're in a space and place where we're talking about flattening the COVID-19 curve, right? And that is critically important because of many reasons. But when you think about a lot of the disparities and how they impact not just Black businesses, but the Black community, the health disparities, this is a time that we need to flatten the economic disparity curve, because that is just as important. And if we are really, like I said, really talking about economic growth in the communities, not just of color, but in the community as a whole, we really have to have a focus on flattening that economic disparity curve, because that, again, is what's going to make us a viable community as a whole.
May I add just a little to Donna? Amen, amen, amen. I love Donna. She just lays it out. But I just want to add a little bit on top of what she said, because I just want to bring it home a little bit. African Americans make up around 3% of the population in this region. Whether you want to say city, county, you name it, it's about 3%. However, we're number one in all the negative, right, data marks that you can track, right? So there's a huge disparity. Imprisonment, you know, we've been imprisoned at a higher rate than any other community in this region. Healthcare, we have all of the health disparities, you name them, all the negative ones at a higher rate than most individuals in the community. Income equality. Donna just talked about that. We talk about asset building. We talked about that. So if you're 3% of the population, but you're in all the high risk categories, you don't need to be a civil engineer to figure out that that's not a sustainable model. After about 20 years, you're gonna go to 2%, 1%, and you may not even register on the Richter scale 50 years from now in this community. That's why this issue is important to me. That's why I'm so passionate about it. That's why I'm trying to bring youngsters back to San Diego, and I'm so focused on healing the African-American community, because a stable African-American community is going to create a stable San Diego community. Let me be clear about that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rudy. And we've had a couple questions come in that I do want to take a minute to respond to. One of them, a great question from Linda Katz that Linda, I've been sitting on for a minute so that we could finish talking about the pillars before we respond, because it pertains to the pillars. Pamela, you indicated that you would like to answer this question. Linda asked if, so the San Diego region has a large population of Latinas and Latinos. And Linda's wondering if many of these same strategies and 4 pillars of grant making to help create generational wealth should be applied to helping create generational wealth for the Latino community as well.
I think it's a great question, and one that I know is on the mind of many people. For the purposes of the Black Community Investment Fund, we elected to intentionally address the disparities affecting the Black community. And one of the reasons why is everything that Rudy just spoke about in terms of the inequities and what not just the symptoms, but the impact of those inequities, crime, education, health disparities, et cetera. And so we really believe that in order to change those numbers, that it starts with addressing the Black community through the 4 pillars that we've identified. Now, currently in San Diego County, the Latinx population has a homeownership rate that's about 33%. In San Diego County, the African-American community homeownership rate is about 19%, which is 13% less than the nationwide average. So it's a much smaller percentage of people in San Diego, Black people in San Diego, who own property than it would be anywhere else in the country. And what we are very mindful of is that we can't do everything right now. You know, our organization, working with the Central San Diego Black Chamber and the wonderful advisory committee that we have, or advisory council that we have working with us, Rudy and Donna, of course, are instrumental members of that advisory council, really elected to focus our efforts right now on the African-American community. However, once we have made an impact there and are ready to move on, we may very well decide that it's time to work and support other members of the BIPOC community. And it could very well be that our next effort is around the Latinx community.
Thank you, Pamela, and Linda, thank you for the great question. Another question, and I believe that we have a number of folks who make hiring decisions on this call, so I think it's a great question that came in. As we're recruiting for new hires for our company, do any of our panelists have recommendations for where and how folks should share job postings that might increase visibility within the Black community so they can identify the best candidates San Diego has to offer? I'll open that up to any of our panelists that would like to respond.
Well, let me jump in, because you know, I'm a huge proponent of really working outside the proverbial box. Number one, I strongly encourage any major corporation to link up with the Neighborhood House Association. 4 times a year, we go out to HBCUs. Obviously, it's been virtual through the pandemic, and we recruit in regions across the country to solicit the youngest, brightest African-American minds that we can encourage to bring and recruit back to San Diego. So link up with us and we can put our information in the chat box. Number 2, I would encourage individuals to step outside the state of California and recruit. You know, I know we have some great educational institutions right here in our backyard, but if you want the full depth and breadth of diversity, sometimes you have to get outside the state of California. And then I would say, in your final list of 3 or 4 applicants, always make sure you have the diversity that you're looking for in that short listing that could yield you some diversity at the mid-range and executive levels of your organization. So those are 3 suggestions that I would make to individuals that are out there looking.
Thank you, Rudy. And that question was submitted anonymously, but whoever submitted it, if you need Rudy's contact information, you can reach out to us and we'll connect you. But we will also drop the website for both organizations in the chat before we close. Okay. I want to make sure, we always like to close these by making sure that we're calling out specific ways that folks can be a part of solutions. And the first thing I want to say is I know that a number of people in this meeting have made gifts to the Black Community Investment Fund, and we are so, so grateful to you for that support. When we're talking about these solutions, it is not possible, and about the home buyer program that is already underway, that work isn't possible without financial support, without partnerships, and we are so grateful for your support. I will ask our comms folks to pull up the call to action slide now with a few ways that folks can be part of solutions. And I want to call back to one of Rudy's earlier points. These are ways that we can think about how to be boat builders. How can we come together to build the boat under folks so that they can enjoy the effect of the rising tide? A few ways to be part of solution: give strategically to organizations and projects working to address root causes of inequity and systemic racism, like the Black Community Investment Fund or like either of the phenomenal organizations represented here today. We would love for folks to take the opportunity to learn more about the Central Black Chamber of Commerce or Neighborhood House Association. I believe that we will be dropping links to both of their websites in the chat right now. If you would like to learn more about either these issues or the Black Community Investment Fund in particular, please feel free to contact the San Diego Foundation staff. Our staff would be happy to have a conversation with you about this work or to make connections in the community for you. Register for upcoming educational webinars. This is the second in a series of 8, and you will be receiving invitations to our upcoming webinars. The next 2 will be focused on the college access and specifically COVID-related challenges, and the following one about early childhood education and how they affect both childhood development and our economy. We've all seen the statistics about how women's careers have been impacted in particularly extreme ways during this crisis. And possibly most importantly, as we are all on our own learning journeys, think about how we can bring someone else along. Take the information that you're learning today and elsewhere and share it. Bring someone on the journey with you. One of the most important and powerful ways to affect change is to grow the circle of folks who understand and are committed to that work. We all have our networks, our spheres of influence, both personal and professional. Think about who in your network you think would be interested and bring them along on the journey with you. And please do let us know how we can help you with that. Thank you to our speakers, to Pamela, to Rudy, to Donna for being so generous with your time and expertise. And thank you to everyone for joining us today for this conversation. We are so grateful to have you with us as partners in this important work.
And Katie, may I make one last comment? And that is to thank our Board of Trustees, which invested $1 million in this initiative. So I really want to acknowledge their support and just encourage those who have contributed to know that it is going to be put to very, very good use. And you can see the leadership that we have on this panel helping to make those critical decisions. So thank you all.
Thank you.